Hello, folks, and welcome back for another spooky story. Today, we are going to get into the second of three parts. I've decided I'm going to break this into three parts of The Judge's House by Bram Stoker. So, welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me here today on my channel. We are audio only again because it's still hot. It is much cooler today. We had a thunderstorm overnight, but it's still too hot to have all the lights on and my backdrop up and all of that. So we are still in audio only mode. So I don't know how long it'll take for things to cool off. I suspect not until fall. We'll see what happens. Pardon me, I do have a cup of tea here. It's very nice. So yes, the second part of the Judge's House. And before we get into it, pardon me, the usual warning in that these are Victorian and Edwardian stories and sometimes contain distasteful thoughts about race, gender, religion, orientation, all the usual things because of the time period that they were written in. So definitely, if that seems like it's not your cup of tea, feel free to not consume this content and find another video. Additionally, creepy stories tend to originate from very unfortunate circumstances, murders and other such unpleasant things. And again, if that doesn't sound like something you're interested in, please feel free to find something else to watch today. Other than that, we will jump right on into it. Quick recap, our protagonist, Malcolm Malcolmson, which I still say is a very boring ass name, and his parents should feel bad about it, is a student, and he is renting a house out in the boonies to be able to study better, basically. He wants to get away from it all to study. The locals are telling him that the house is old and creepy and he shouldn't stay there, or at least some of them are. In a true horror protagonist fashion, he has disregarded their warnings, and now he's in the home. And when we left off, there was the sound of rats, followed by a giant rat making an appearance, which is sort of where we left off. So for a lot of people, it's already scary if you really don't like rats and things. So anyway, the second part of our three-part series of The Judge's House by Bram Stoker. Malcolmson felt amazed and, seizing the poker from the hearth, ran at it to kill it. Aw, man, leave the rat alone. He's just hanging out. Share your dinner, geez. Before, however, he could strike it, the rat, with a squeak that sounded like the concentration of hate, well, probably because you're trying to kill it, just saying, jumped upon the floor and, running up the rope of the alarm bell, disappeared into the darkness beyond the range of the green-shaded lamp. Instantly, strange to say, the noisy scamperings of the rats in the wainscot began again. Maybe that rat is their leader. Who knows? Like in The Secret of Nim. By this time, Malcolmson's mind was quite off the problem, and as a shrill cock crow outside told him of the approach of morning, he went to bed and to sleep. I have never in my life pulled an all-nighter. I like regular sleep, and lots of it, way too much for that. He slept so sound that he was not even waked by Mrs. Dempster coming in to make up his room. Must be nice to just have all these servants, but it must be nice to have people that just constantly take care of your regular day-to-day needs. That means that you can devote yourself entirely to studying something. There's a really good book about that called Who Cooked the Last Supper, and it's all about these invisible women throughout history that made all these discoveries possible. It was only when she tidied up the place and got his breakfast ready and tapped on the screen which closed in his bed that he woke. He was a little tired still after his night's hard work, but a strong cup of tea soon freshened him up, and, taking his book, he went out for his morning walk. Wait, it's still morning? Dude, you're not getting enough sleep. You're going to fail your exam. Bringing with him a few sandwiches, lest he should not care to return home till dinner time. He found a quiet walk between the high elms some way outside the town, and here he spent the greater part of the day studying his Laplace. I'm assuming that's some sort of math science dude that I don't know. On his return, he looked in to see Mrs. Witham and to thank her for her kindness. When she saw him coming through the diamond-paned bay window of her sanctum, she came out to meet him and asked him in. She looked at him searchingly and shook her head as she said, "You must not overdo it, sir. You are paler this morning than you should be. 2 late hours, yet exactly, I agree. And too hard work on the brain isn't good for any man. But tell me, sir, how did you pass the night? Well, I hope? But my heart, sir, I was glad when Mrs. Dempster told me this morning that you were all right and sleeping sound when she went in." "Oh, I was all right," he answered, smiling. "The somethings didn't worry me, as yet, only the rats, and they had a circus, I tell you, all over the place. There was one wicked-looking old devil that sat up on my own chair by the fire, and wouldn't go till I took the poker to him. And then he ran up the rope of the alarm bell and got to somewhere up the wall or the ceiling. I couldn't see where. It was so dark." "Mercy on us," said Mrs. Witham. "An old devil and sitting on a chair by the fireside. Take care, sir, take care. There's many a true word spoken in jest." "How do you mean, 'pon my word? I don't understand." "An old devil, the old devil, perhaps. There, sir, you needn't laugh." For Malcolmson had broken into a hearty peal. "Oh, don't be a dick to the old woman that's like feeding you and helping you out. You young folks thinks it easy to laugh at things that make older ones shudder. Never mind, sir, never mind. Please God, you'll laugh all the time. It's what I wish myself." And the good lady beamed all over in sympathy with his enjoyment, her fears gone for a moment. "Oh, forgive me," said Malcolmson presently. "Don't think me rude, but the idea was too much for me that the old devil himself was on the chair last night." And at the thought he laughed again. Then he went home to dinner. This evening the scampering of the rats began earlier. Indeed, it had been going on before his arrival, and only ceased whilst his presence by its... Pardon me. Let me try this sentence again. Indeed, it had been going on before his arrival, and only ceased whilst his presence by its freshness disturbed them. After dinner he sat by the fire for a while and had a smoke, and then, having cleared his table, began to work as before. Yeah, this guy's not getting enough sleep. That's bad for you. Tonight the rats disturbed him more than they had done on the previous night. How they scampered up and down and over and under. Just have a bit of some tea. Oh, hot. How they squeaked and scratched and gnawed. How they, getting bolder by degrees, came to the mouths of their holes and to the chinks and cracks and crannies in the wainscoting, whichever you prefer, till their eyes shone like tiny lamps as the firelight rose and fell. But to him, now doubtless accustomed to them, their eyes were not wicked. Only their playfulness touched him. Sometimes the boldest of them made sallies out on the floor or along the mouldings of the wainscot. Now and again, as they disturbed him, Malcolmson made a sound to frighten them, smiting the table with his hands or giving a fierce hush hush, so that they fled straightway to their holes. And so the early part of the night wore on, and, despite the noise, Malcolmson got more and more immersed in his work. All at once he stopped, as on the previous night, being overcome by a sudden sense of silence. There was not the faintest sound of gnaw or scratch or squeak. The silence was as of the grave. He remembered the odd occurrence of the previous night, and instinctively he looked at the chair standing by the fireside. And then came a very odd sensation that thrilled through him. There, on the great old high-backed carved oak chair beside the fireplace, sat the same enormous rat, steadily glaring at him with baleful eyes. Instinctively, he took the nearest thing to his hand, a book of logarithms, and flung at it. And flung it at it. I mean, I wouldn't want the book of logarithms either. Sounds dreadful. The book was badly aimed, and the rat did not stir. So again, the poker performance of the previous night was repeated. And again, the rat, being closely pursued, fled up the rope of the alarm bell. Strangely, too, the departure of this rat was followed instantly by the renewal of the noise made by the general rat community. On this occasion, as on the previous one, Malcolmson could not see at what part of the room the rat disappeared, for the green shade of his lamp left the upper part of the room in darkness, and the fire had burned low. On looking at his watch, he found it was close on midnight, and, not sorry for the divertissement, he made up his fire and made himself his nightly pot of tea. He had got through a good spell of work and thought himself entitled to a cigarette, and so he sat on the great carved oak chair before the fire and enjoyed it. While smoking, he began to think that he would like to know where the rat had disappeared to, for he had certain ideas for the morrow not entirely disconnected with a rat trap. Accordingly, he lit another lamp and placed it so that it would shine well into the right-hand corner of the wall by the fireplace. Then he got all the books he had with him and placed them handy to throw at the vermin. Finally, he lifted the rope of the alarm bell and placed the end of it on the table, fixing the extreme end under the lamp. That seems like a bad idea, because if the rat's heavy enough, it's going to knock the lamp over, and then you might start a fire. As he handled it, he could not help noticing how pliable it was, especially for so strong a rope, and one not in use. You could hang a man with that, he thought to himself. Wonder if that'll be foreshadowing. When his preparations were made, he looked around and said complacently, "There now, my friend, I think we shall learn something of you this time." He began his work again, and though, as before, somewhat disturbed at first by the noise of the rats, he soon lost himself in his propositions and problems. So, like, you're staying in a house full of rats. So, sure, it happens, I guess, when it's somewhere that's not been lived in for a long time. But why would you continue to stay there? Because supernatural elements aside, do you really want rats going through, eating all, and like peeing on all your stuff? I feel like this large rat community represents a threat that's like not really paranormal, more like sanitary. I'm surprised he's clearly like, I'm a man of science, but I'm going to let these rats piss all over my stuff. It just seems weird. Again, he was called to his immediate surroundings suddenly. This time it might not have been the sudden silence only which took his attention. There was a slight movement of the rope, and the lamp moved. Yeah, dude, it's a bad idea. You're going to knock it over. Without stirring, he looked to see if his pile of books was within range, and then cast his eye along the rope. As he looked, he saw the great rat drop from the rope on the oak armchair and sit there, glaring at him. He raised a book in his right hand and, taking careful aim, flung it at the rat. The latter, with a quick movement, sprang aside and dodged the missile. Then he took another book and a third and flung them one after the other at the rat, but each time unsuccessfully. Yeah, rats are supposed to be pretty smart. At last, he stood with a book poised in his hand to throw. The rat squeaked and seemed afraid. This made Malcolmson more than eager to strike, and the book flew and struck the rat a resounding blow. It gave a terrified squeak, and turning on its pursuer, a look of terrible malevolence, ran up the chair back and made a great jump to the rope of the alarm bell and ran up it like lightning. The lamp rocked under the sudden strain, but it was a very heavy one and did not topple over. Yeah, good. Otherwise, you'd be on fire there, Malcolmson. Malcolmson kept his eyes on the rat and saw it by the light of the second lamp leap to a molding of the wainscot and disappear through a hole in one of the great pictures which hung on the wall, obscured and invisible through its coating, through its coating of dirt and dust. "I shall look up my friend's habitation in the morning," said the student as he went over to collect his books. "The third picture from the fireplace. I shall not forget." He picked up the books one by one, commenting on them as he lifted them. Oh my God, I don't know these words. I'll give him a shot. Conic sections he does not mind, nor cycloidal oscillations, nor the Principia, nor, oh my God, quaternions, nor thermodynamics. Yeah, sure, whatever those words are. Now for the book that fetched him. Malcolmson took it up and looked at it. As he did so, he started, and a sudden pallor overspread his face. He looked round uneasily and shivered slightly as he murmured to himself, The Bible my mother gave me. What an odd coincidence." He sat down to work again, and the rats in the wainscot renewed their gambols. They did not disturb him, however. Somehow their presence gave him a sense of companionship. But he could not attend to his work, and after striving to master the subject on which he was engaged, gave it up in despair and went to bed as the first streak of dawn stole in through the eastern window. He slept heavily but uneasily and dreamed much, and when Mrs. Dempster woke him late in the morning, he seemed ill at ease, and for a few minutes did not seem to realize exactly where he was. His first request rather surprised the servant. "Mrs. Dempster, when I am out today, I wish you would get the steps and dust or wash those pictures, especially that one, the third from the fireplace. I want to see what they are." Late in the afternoon, Malcolmson worked at his books in the shaded walk, and the cheerfulness of the previous day came back to him as the day wore on, and he found that his reading was progressing well. He had worked out to a satisfactory conclusion all the problems which had as yet baffled him, and it was in a state of jubilation that he paid a visit to Mrs. Witham at the Good Traveller. He found a stranger in the cozy sitting room with the landlady, who was introduced to him as Dr. Thornhill. She was not quite at ease, and this, combined with the doctor's plunging at once into a series of questions, made Malcolmson come to the conclusion that his presence was not an accident. So without preliminary, he said, I'm going to have another sip of tea. "Dr. Thornhill, I shall with pleasure answer you any question that you may choose to ask me, if you will answer me one first." The doctor seemed surprised, but he smiled and answered at once. "Done. What is it?" "Did Mrs. Witham ask you to come here and see me and advise me?" Dr. Thornhill was for a moment taken aback, and Mrs. Witham got fiery red and turned away. But the doctor was a frank and ready man, and he answered at once and openly. "She did. But she didn't intend you to know it. I suppose it was my clumsy haste that made you suspect. She told me that she did not like the idea of your being in that house all by yourself, and that she thought you took too much strong tea. I mean, he doesn't appear to be sleeping enough, so I'm not against Mrs. Witham on that one. In fact, she wants me to advise you, if possible, to give up the tea and the very late hours. This is actually very good advice from the doctor. I was a keen student in my time, so I suppose I may take the liberty of a college man, and without offense, advise you not quite as a stranger." Malcolmson, with a bright smile, held out his hand. "Shake, as they say in America," he said. "I must thank you for your kindness, and Mrs. Witham too, and your kindness deserves a return on my part. I promise to take no more strong tea. No tea at all till you let me. And I shall go to bed tonight at 1 o'clock at the latest. Will that do?" "Capital," said the doctor. "Now tell us all that you noticed in the old house." And so Malcolmson then and there told in minute detail all that had happened in the last 2 nights. He was interrupted every now and then by some exclamation from Mrs. Witham, till finally, when he told of the episode of the Bible, the lady's pent-up emotions found a vent in a shriek, and it was not till a stiff glass of brandy and water had been administered that she grew composed again. Dr. Thornhill listened with a face of growing gravity, and when the narrative was complete and Mrs. Witham had been restored, he asked, "The rat was always up the rope of the alarm bell?" "Always. I suppose you know," said the doctor after a pause, "what the rope is?" "No." "It is," said the doctor slowly, "the very rope which the hangman used for all the victims of the judge's judicial rancor." Here he was interrupted by another scream from Mrs. Witham, and steps had to be taken for her recovery. Malcolmson, having looked at his watch and found that it was close to his dinner hour, had gone home before her complete recovery. So there we go. It's a weird, pliant rope because it's a hangman's rope. That's kind of weird. I feel like judges shouldn't be allowed to take their hangman's rope as some sort of weird trophy. That seems inappropriate. When Mrs. Witham was herself again, she almost assailed the doctor with angry questions as to what he meant by putting such horrible ideas into the poor young man's mind. "He has quite enough there already to upset him," she added. Dr. Thornhill replied, "My dear madam, I had a distinct purpose in it. I wanted to draw his attention to the bell rope and to fix it there. It may be that he is in a highly overwrought state and has been studying too much, although I am bound to say that he seems as sound and healthy as a young man, mentally and bodily, as ever I saw. But then the rats, and that suggestion of the devil." The doctor shook his head and went on. "I would have offered to go and stay the night with him, but that I felt sure it would have been a cause of offense. He may not get in the night some strange... Pardon me, hiccup. Let me try that sentence again. He may get in the night some strange fright or hallucination, and if he does, I want him to pull that rope. All alone as he is, it will give us warning, and we might reach him in time to be of service. I shall be sitting up pretty late tonight, and shall keep my ears open. Do not be alarmed if Benchurch gets a surprise before morning." "Oh, doctor, what do you mean? What do you mean?" "I mean this, that possibly, nay, more probably, we shall hear the great alarm bell from the judge's house tonight," and the doctor made about as an effective exit as could be thought of. And that is where I am going to leave it this time for part 2 of The Judge's House. We'll get to part 3 and the exciting conclusion in the next video. So I guess it's kind of I guess it's kind of ambiguous if the bell rope is actually the hangman's rope, or if the doctor was just making stuff up to scare the kid. Either way, you shouldn't just run experiments on people without them knowing. I feel like that's why there's codes of ethics and stuff when you want to set up experiments, because you shouldn't just spiritually and mentally torture a student for fun. But hey, I'm not a doctor. What do I know? So thank you for joining me for another video. I hope you can hang out with me here again very soon. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well now and in the future. So goodbye, folks.